Algeria International. You will not miss a single major political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
The President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has emphasized that the 11th edition of the high-level seminar on peace and security in Africa, which opened today in Oran, is a symbol of commitment, unity, and Africa's resounding voice. The Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has held bilateral talks in Iran with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Uganda and the EU Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security. And the 48th session of the European Coordination Conference of Solidarity with the Sahrawi People has wound up in Lisbon, Portugal, with a reiterated call for an end to Morocco's occupation of Western Sahara. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. First, the 11th edition of the high-level seminar on peace and security in Africa today opened in the western city of Oran. In a message read on his behalf by the Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, extended a warm welcome to the participants, emphasizing that the seminar carries symbolism of commitment, the significance of unity, and constitutes a message to the entire world that demonstrates that Africa can make its voice heard.
I welcome you to this event, which is not just a meeting, but it carries the symbolism of commitment, the significance of unity, and a message to the entire world, showing that Africa is determined, Africa is united, Africa is capable of having a one voice heard, strong, resounding, and influential at the highest level of authority in the international order. Today, this organization is in dire need of the voice of wisdom, justice, and commitment, as it suffers from an almost complete paralysis that reflects the critical reality of international relations.
The head of state also pointed out that the world is witnessing profound transformations and mounting tensions, adding that the aggression on Palestine is the best example of the double standard practiced by world powers.
The world is experiencing today profound transformations and increasing tensions that are pushing the international order towards a decisive crossroads. The war-torn Palestine gives us the best indication of the violation of international legitimacy and the best evidence of the depth of the gap between declared principles and effective implementation.
Algeria, President Tebboune went on to say, devoted the first year of its term in the UN Security Council to representing the continent in the best possible way, and pledges to continue on the same path during the second term.
Algeria, as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, has devoted the first year of its term in coordination with its sisters Mozambique and Sierra Leone to representing the continent in the best possible way in the central United Nations body, where it has spared no effort to strengthen the influence of our continent on the decision-making process, especially those that directly concern the continued based on its common positions, based on the principles, values and ideals enshrined in the Constitutive Act of the African Union. Algeria pledges to continue its efforts in this regard during the second year of its term in the United Nations Council, alongside its sisters from the republics of Sierra Leone and Somalia.
And to have more on the 11th session or 11th edition of the high-level seminar on peace and security held in the western province of Oran, our special envoy and reporter, Asya Bakar, is there to keep us updated with the latest. Asya, can you hear us?
Hi, Mohammed. Yes, I can hear you. Well, the 11th session of the high-level seminar on peace and security in Africa is now being held here in the western city of Oran. Following the statement of the President of the Republic read on his behalf by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, other participating senior officials spoke about the importance of the high-level seminar on peace and security in Africa. They highlighted that this year's session is centered on counterterrorism and fighting extremism on the continent. The Mauritanian Foreign Minister Mohamed Salim Ould Marzouk praised the advance in the process of facing up to the challenges on the continent, especially those facing peace and security. Commissioner of the African Peace and Security Council, for his part, Mr. Adoui Bankoli, said the seminar is to boost coordination and cooperation among the members of the Council and between the A3 and the Security Council. Let's note that the seminar, which lasts for 2 days, will address a number of themes of major importance, notably strengthening coordination between the African Union Peace and Security Council and the 3 African members of the Security Council, with the aim of making Africa's voice heard in this body and effectively defending common African positions on issues relating to peace and security, in addition to or through the strengthening of the integrated capacities of African states to face these challenges, focusing on the role of the African Union Counterterrorism Center on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of its creation. Back to you, Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Asya. We keep in touch with you for any other information in the future. Thank you. And it's worth noting that the seminar is attended by members of the Peace and Security Council, the current African members of the UN Security Council, or A3+, namely Algeria, Mozambique, and the upcoming members, which are Sierra Leone, Somalia. The friends of the seminar and senior officials from the AU Commission and from the UN Secretariat, as well as some international partners as supporters of the seminar. Earlier, the Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, received in the western city of Oran the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations in charge of peacekeeping operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix. The meeting, held on the eve of the 11th edition of the high-level seminar on peace and security, was an opportunity to discuss cooperation between Algeria and the United Nations in such areas as peacekeeping and security. And the Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has held also bilateral talks in Oran with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Uganda, Mr. Odongo Jeje Abukara, on the sidelines of the 11th edition of the Peace and Security Seminar in Africa, and also held bilateral talks with the African Union Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, Mr. Bankole Adoyi. The meeting was devoted to discussing cooperation relations between Algeria and the African Union in the fields of peace and security, and highlighting the support provided by Algeria to the African institutions its hosts, such as AFRIPOL and the African Union Counterterrorism Center. The 48th session of the European Coordination Conference of Solidarity with the Sahrawi People has wound up in Lisbon, Portugal, with a reiterated call for an end to Morocco's occupation of Western Sahara. In a final document issued at the end of the 2-day meeting held under the theme Europe and Africa, Two United Continents for Western Sahara's Independence, the participants unanimously agreed on the necessity to enabling the Sahrawi people to exercise their legitimate right to freedom and independence. In this connection, they condemned the position adopted by some countries, including France and Spain, considering their decision on the Sahrawi issue as running counter international law, and hailed Algeria's unswerving position and support to the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination. Algeria's ambassador to Lisbon, Hamid Moussi, expressed satisfaction at the outcome of the UCOCO meeting, while insisting on the necessity to allow the Sahrawi people to fulfill its legitimate rights.
Les échos que j'ai sont plus que satisfaisants.
The echoes they had were very positive, so as was the workshop's work, the debate was very rich. All this in favor of the Sahrawi issue that deserves all the attention and support, so that the Sahrawi people could fulfill its legitimate right and that the international community respect its inalienable right to self-determination. As you saw, the last resolution adopted last month, Algeria's role, and Algeria, which has always been respectful of its principles, will never relinquish its efforts in support of all fair causes, namely the Palestinian and Sahrawi.
That was Algeria's ambassador to Lisbon, Hamid Moussi, speaking to Radio Algeria International. The Lisbon meeting brought about over 300 participants representing 21 countries, as well as representatives of associations of support with the Sahrawi people. And finally, we move on now to our weekly programs. But before, we have a special program with our colleague Assia Bakar, who is covering now the 11th edition of the Peace and Security Seminar in the city of Oran, who had this interview with the African Union ambassador to the UN, namely Fatima Kayari Mohammed. After the interview, you will listen to your weekly program, the International Event of the Week. As for me, I'll meet you again tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin in English. Until then, stay tuned and goodbye.
Hello there and welcome on the waves of Radio Algeria International. I am happy today to have with me here in the western city of Oran on the sidelines of the 11th session of the high-level seminar on peace and security in Africa, Mrs. Fatima Kayari Mohammed, the permanent observer of the African Union to the United Nations. So nice to meet you. So now, what are the major priorities of this year's seminar?
Well, as you're aware, this seminar is organized on an annual basis for several years now. And the main objective is to strengthen the coordination between the African members to the UN Security Council and the members of the AU Peace and Security Council. So every year, Algeria hosts this seminar, identifying priorities for the year. And this year is unique for a number of reasons. Obviously, we have representation from partner countries and the United Nations every year. But this year, the African members to the UN Security Council, which we call the A3, have an additional member, which is the A3 plus one. And the plus one concept we started a few years ago when the Caribbean member state, which was SVG, joined the African members, and then we created this plus one concept where the Caribbeans, which is the sixth region we consider it the sixth region of Africa, joined the A3. So this year we will have Guyana, who was also invited to join.
What do you think about the process of counterterrorism currently in Africa?
Well, as you're aware, we have the Counterterrorism Center, which is based in Alger. It's a major issue across the board. West, East Africa, now we're seeing parts of Southern Africa also being affected. And for many years it was more or less kind of cushioned from the scourge. It's a major issue that we on the continent have to really come together to focus on addressing. What we see happening in the Sahel, for example, with the fall of Libya, how it has moved to countries such as Mali, Niger, northern Nigeria to a certain extent. It's become, I think, one of the top priorities in terms of addressing. And this is why we worked diligently over the last 5-6 years with our team, both at the United Nations and in Addis Ababa, towards pushing this resolution called 2719. And Resolution 2719 focuses on, one, ensuring that Africa is able to have assessed contributions to when, in terms of supporting peace support operations in Africa. The resolution was passed in December. And one of the major arguments was we need to go beyond peacekeeping. We need to focus on peace enforcement. And peace enforcement can only be done in a way that the mandate provided to the peacekeepers, well, if that's what they're going to be called in the future, the mandate allows them to go beyond just keeping peace where there is peace to keep. And our argument is that in most contexts there is no peace to keep. And so when our UN peacekeepers are attacked, they're not able to attack back. with the African operations, the idea of peace enforcement is actually to address terrorism really frontally. And so I think this is a major step in the right direction, and a lot more effort needs to be done.
Many countries at the UN Security Council, Algeria is one of them, have been advocating for reforming the UN Security Council for the benefit of different causes and for Africa, of course. What do you think about this? And do you think that reforming the UN Security Council would benefit Africa, and in what way?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a position on UN Security Council reform, which is called the Eswatini Consensus and the Sirte Declaration. And we have a committee of 10 countries that have been working towards the reform of the UN Security Council, Algeria being one of them. And it's been chaired by Sierra Leone. The idea behind it was to basically say, looking at it historically and looking at the fact that over 60% of the agenda of the Security Council is on Africa. Africa must have a permanent seat. And so recently, if you've been following, I think about sometime, if I'm not mistaken, it was late last year or earlier this year. I'm not sure. But the U.S. president had declared the need to have permanent membership for Africa on the Security Council. And then a couple of months ago, the U.S. ambassador to the UN also reiterated this. Now, one of the major issues in terms of the Security Council reform is the veto. And although there is support, particularly by the announcement by one of the members of the P5 for Africa to have a permanent seat, I think the major issue for us is the issue of the veto. Because we feel being on the Security Council without a veto is only half the power. So I believe the two upcoming meetings, one that will be taking place next week at the level of ambassadors, and then in January at the level of ministers, this issue will be discussed by the leadership, and hopefully by the next AU summit we will be able to come up with a position given the progress that has been made to date.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Fatima Kiari Mohammed. Let's recall that you are the permanent observer of the African Union to the United Nations. Thank you so much for being with us on Radio Algeria International.
The international event of the week.
A major event this week was the coming into force of a 60-day-long ceasefire in Lebanon. The 13-point agreement concluded between the Israeli and Lebanese governments provides for an end to the fighting and for an Israeli troop withdrawal from Lebanon's southern part, pending the Lebanese army's deployment there. It also provides for the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, as well as for steps to be taken in order to set conditions for a permanent and comprehensive solution in Lebanon. The implementation of the ceasefire agreement will be monitored by the US and France in coordination of the three-party mechanism bringing together the Israeli and the Lebanese army and the UN Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL. Asked if the ceasefire agreement could be a prelude to an end to nearly 14 months of fighting that claimed over 3,900 lives, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi had the following.
This temporary ceasefire doesn't seem viable with the burden of keeping it or extending it remains on Lebanon. And there is no real commitment from the Israelis who having room to act against what they perceive or they may perceive as violation of the agreement by what they would claim Hezbollah. Another related factor is the Israeli reaction to the ceasefire. By Netanyahu's own terms, he sees the temporary ceasefire as an opportunity for the Israel Defense Forces to refresh from the long war and to get the ammunition they need to finish what he calls the war. And Netanyahu and other Israelis including the extreme right, are also betting on the newly elected President Donald Trump to continue the war against Hezbollah and dragging Iran into the fold. In his justification for the ceasefire, Netanyahu cited eliminating Iran's threat as his number one reason for the war in Lebanon. During his campaign, President-elect Trump urged the United States and Israel to attack Iran for personal reasons, claiming the Iranian orchestrated or had plans to kill him, which means that Netanyahu will most likely will not likely take this ceasefire as a long-term objective, but rather just temporary, and he would rely heavily on Trump's support to go after Iran.
The Israeli attacks, which intensified last September, had destroyed large parts of Lebanon, including Beirut and its southern suburbs and several other cities. The intensified campaign of bombardments caused the displacement of more than 1.2 million Lebanese. In a preliminary assessment, the World Bank affirmed that more than 99,000 houses had been partially or totally destroyed by the Israeli airstrikes. The damage, estimated at $2.8 billion, raises the question about Lebanon's reconstruction. So far, observers affirm that the Lebanese state will be unable to address the reconstruction issue without the international community's contribution, mainly after the collapse of Lebanon's financial system 5 years ago. Asked on whether the international community is committed to supporting Lebanon's reconstruction as the country is still recovering from the blast of Beirut's port and from an acute economic crisis, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi had the following.
The need to rebuild Lebanon is enormous. According to the World Bank, it is estimated that the cause of the damage caused by Israel amount to $8.5 billion. Currently, there is no concrete reconstruction plan, but the Lebanese government and several Western countries are seeking financial assistance from countries in the Gulf as well as other Western countries. A summit meeting also held in Kuwait this week is expected to generate some support from the Gulf countries. At the same time, the Iranians are also pledging to help reconstruct Lebanon. The Lebanese people and government will also place or are placing high hope on the $1 billion pledge that was gotten last month at the International Conference for Lebanon held in Paris. Those pledges have not come, including $300 million from the United States. But a significant part of the cost will be on the Lebanese community, civil society, and it is expected that some wealthy individuals and investors from all over the country and the region will contribute to this reconstruction. As such, much of the success of rebuilding Lebanon will depend on several sources, including the international community support, as Lebanese Daily noted recently.
World leaders hailed the ceasefire agreement as a new step towards a restoration of peace and security in the Middle East. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres welcomed the ceasefire as a ray of hope in the region. The Arab League hailed the agreement and stressed the need to intensify efforts to reach a similar deal on the Gaza Strip as soon as possible. In a similar move, US President Joe Biden announced that in the coming days, the United States will, as he put it, make another push with Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, and other countries to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. Asked if there were any prospects for a ceasefire in Gaza as the negotiations have remained fruitless so far, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi commented the issue.
It is too early to make any prediction on whether this temporary ceasefire can lead or can be seen as a prelude to another agreement in Gaza. According to report, both the current elect president and the newly elected president want the war in Gaza to end, but they have different reasons. President Biden, to him, this is a matter of his legacy. He wants to leave the Oval Office with an agreement to solidify his legacy and also continue showing his unconditional support for Israel. While the newly elected president, he has, according to his close allies, his eyes focused on Iran and the resumption of the normalization of Arab-Israeli relations. President-elect Donald Trump wants a deal with Gaza to bring the hostages, and to him this would pave the way for his other project, which is to go after Iran. During their meeting at the White House, as reported, the two presidents discussed the situation in Gaza and the hostages. Some saw that opportunity as an opportunity to perhaps repeat what they refer to as a Reagan-Carter moment. This is when President Jimmy Carter signed a hostage deal with the Iranians just 24 hours before President-elect Ronald Reagan was inaugurated the next day. Both Trump and Biden are expected to do the same, coordinating their efforts and ensuring and pushing for a ceasefire in Gaza, and as I said, for different reasons. But any success on this must be met with the Palestinians' resistance support, which, according to reports from the heads of the Israeli Defense Forces and Israeli intelligence, the Palestinian resistance would not drop their condition for a full withdrawal from Gaza, which poses a problem for Netanyahu, which seems he has plans to stay there. At the same time, much also depends on Netanyahu's personal agenda. He knows very well that if he signs an agreement, his government will collapse, and more than anything else, he might be brought to court. On the final analysis, if Biden and Trump follow what he said in the media, there be a strong chance that the agreement in Lebanon could be a prelude to that of Gaza. The United States has the key to this war and has the solution to it, because it can force Israel to do just that.
Let's recall that the Palestinian Authority expressed hope that the ceasefire agreement would contribute to ending violence and instability in the region resulting from the Israeli policies that are leading the region to an explosion.